third season, I think, is really one of my favorite seasons of all. We really saw what the show could be beyond just a good scary show, beyond a good mythology show.
You want to know what's on that train? Who killed your sister? You find out what they put in your neck.
The expansion of the possibilities of storytelling make it, for me, one of the most exciting seasons to work on.
Once we started season 3, scripts started to evolve and things started to get bigger, and Rob Bowman and I started to stretch our wings creatively. It's a whole different experience directing mythology, and I didn't realize it until I did one.
I have what you want.
Since I did Apocrypha, I always look forward to the mythology episodes. And because we spread them out, 2, 3, 4 a season, I think it's really exciting to know that you're keeping the fans interested, teasing them a little bit.
I had gone to an X-Files convention, and this was one of the few times in my career on the X-Files this has happened. Somebody asked me about Scully's sister, Melissa, who had been murdered at the beginning of that season, and what was going to happen with that. And it occurred to me we had not followed up the emotional consequence for Scully of losing her sister. We dealt with it, in that hour when the sister died at the beginning of the season, but we hadn't touched on it since.
Are you Luis Cardinal?
Please.
Are you the man that shot my sister?
Please don't kill me.
You shot my sister!
Please, I can tell you.
Tell me!
I can't tell you.
Tell me!
I can't tell you what you want. You want Kryche.
So this was actually an X-Files convention in Minneapolis. On the flight back, the story for Piper Maru started to come to me. And I had no paper, I just had a pen. And I took the airline magazine and I started writing all over it and in the margins around the ads. And by the time the plane landed in Los Angeles, I basically had the entire story.
Feel better? Like a new man.
Piper Maru was that's another one that's just like where the creepiness factor is pretty high. One of the things we had to do is we had to have something in the eyes that kind of looked like it was really there, but at the same time looked, really disturbing and really creepy. And then we put them digitally on the surface of the cornea. And we actually move them in such a way that, it's like, the sense you get with floaters in your eye, how they kind of move this way and then they stop and they kind of drift back the other way. We actually made the oil goop move that way. So when he or she blinked, it would follow the blink and then keep going, with a lag in it, as if it's really a liquid, it's really a fluid. It's incredibly creepy. I mean, it creeps me out now still looking at it.
Ask any writer on the show, I guarantee you, and they'll say the hardest scene in the story is Mulder and Scully's first scene in Act 1, because that's where they have to come together on a case, yet they have to be at odds. She has a scientific point of view, he has a paranormal point of view. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's deceptively simple when you see it, and it works very well. But that was my big challenge, and it's still hard.
I think it's pretty clear this is some kind of a horrific cult or gang retribution killing.
Why would he write the character for Ghost on the inside of the crematory oven?
I don't know.
What about the guards seeing 3 figures that seem to vanish without a trace?
So now we're chasing ghosts?
Who are you going to call? Ghosts or ancestral spirits have been central to Chinese spiritual life for centuries.
So you're saying that the ancestral spirits pushed Johnny Lowe into the oven and turned on the gas?
Well, it would sure teach him to respect his elders, wouldn't it?
Scully does have a very unique vocabulary, and I got to say we have a full-time researcher who helps us with a lot of that, and I'm always amazed that Gillian can get those lines out. In fact, it's sometimes fun when you write them because you can throw in as many syllables as you can think of or find in the books, and poor Gillian's got to go out there and actually make them sound like they make sense, and she's great at it.
Hang on, this is odd. His blood test showed acute hypokalemia.
Yeah, what is that?
There's a severe chemical imbalance characterized by high sodium and low potassium levels. Straining too forcefully is very common causation for bursting a brain aneurysm.
What did this turn out to be?
It's organic, mostly hydrochloric acid, similar to what is secreted by the gastric mucosa.
There's a line in the episode Paperclip where Assistant Director Walter Skinner finally has taken enough from the cigarette-smoking man, and during a very tense exchange between them, he says,
This is where you pucker up and kiss my ass.
It was a new high or low. I'm not sure how you want to look at it for the show.
Now listen, you listen to me, you son of a bitch. This man's name is Albert Hostine. You should remember that.
Because if Agents Mulder and Scully come down with so much as a case of the flu, Albert is prepared to recite chapter and verse, file for file, everything on your precious tape.
When I first read it, I was really happy that they, that Chris had written it like this, and I thought it was a very important moment for Skinner.
He had never been that aggressive, and he had never stated his feelings or certainly called somebody out on the carpet like that. And it was, I think, a chance for that character to sort of move into a new area and grow in a way that I think he continues to.
731 follows Nisai. The episode has a great endgame. You see that Stephen Williams, Mr. X, the meanest, nastiest, most lethal killer on the planet, has got Agent Mulder in his arms walking away from the train, and in the background, fabulous David Gautier explosion of the train car. It's like a movie. It really felt like a movie. It didn't have a lot of scare in it. It wasn't a boo episode. It was a big episode. And the end of this story is that Chris Carter saw my cut and called me at home and said, "I just watched your cut of 731, and I just want you to know that I would be really thrilled if you direct the movie for me." And, well, I guess you must have really liked it.
I ain't ever gonna love another man.
Gotta go now.
I'd done some research on death row. I wanted to do a story about a man who is, whether or not he's innocent or guilty going into death row, is treated horribly while in prison and comes back to avenge that treatment.
How many names are on the list?
5. Just like Niche said.
So you knew those 2 guards were going to be murdered?
I knew they're on the list, yeah.
The list was really about a man who was reincarnated as a fly, so maggots were all important to the trail of evidence. I'd never worked with maggots before. I'd, of course, like most people, come into contact with them in the garbage can, unexpectedly several times. But we actually had to have a wrangler come in with maggots and dump them onto an extra who sat there and let those maggots crawl all over him. It's actually one of the most disgusting images that I've ever been a part of on a set. It's not something you want to do right before or after lunch on a set for people who are, in the future looking to direct maggots, which I would recommend against anyway. We had to end up, for the list, constructing an entire cell block of a prison. There wasn't a prison set or a prison to be used in Canada to shoot in. So here I had I think it ended up becoming a 3-story prison set, which would function on all levels, that I wanted to be able to shoot from every angle possible.
What does the place look like?
It's a typical 2-story suburban house. Nice carpets, fireplace. Nice kitchen. Moving walls.
Moving walls?
Yeah. They're rippling.
Oh, cockroaches.
Were the coprophages, of course. That was the episode that saw the introduction of the character known as Bambi.
Dr. Berenbaum, USDA, Agricultural Research Service.
Well, Dr. Berenbaum, I'm going to have to ask you a few questions.
For instance?
What's a woman like you doing in a place like this?
Originally, Jillian wasn't supposed to do half the show. She had to do publicity for something, and I was told, don't give her much to do for this episode. And that happens on a writing staff. And so that's how I came up with the idea of they're always talking on the phone, because all Jillian stuff was done in a day. But I needed a romantic kind of jealousy foil for Scully to get nervous about.
Bambi also has this theory I've never come across.
Who?
Dr. Berenbaum. Anyway,
Her name is Bambi?
Yeah, both her parents were naturalists. Her theory is that UFOs are actually nocturnal insect swarms passing through electrical airfields.
Her name is Bambi?
There was quite a bit of reaction, I think, on the internet, and some mail, and people who were from our female fans were upset that Mulder was interested in anybody other than Dana Scully.
Doesn't appear on there.
We did one shot in there that's like always been a huge favorite with the audiences, and I personally love that shot. And that's where you're looking at the at the show, and all of a sudden a cockroach runs across the screen of your TV set. And you can tell that it's running across the TV set because there's a cut in the drama. So first it's one shot, then it's another shot, but the cockroach is running across the whole time.
The cockroaches don't take direction all that well. And there's one sequence where cockroach is supposed to run up the back of the toilet and get on top of a roll of toilet paper and stare at the camera. Kim couldn't get these things to move at all.
The same sequence when Bill Dow was sitting on the toilet, I needed to dolly in with the camera and come over Bill reading his newspaper and come up over his head and then tilt down to the top of the toilet seat behind him. And at that moment, these cockroaches were supposed to run up. Obviously, after 7 or 8 takes, we were having no success. And as a joke, we had built a cockroach corral so they couldn't get loose. And each time they'd bring a bucket around and pick up the half a dozen cockroaches. So as a joke, I put my head in the bucket. And I said, listen, you guys, there's going to be 2 actions. One will be camera action. Second action is for you. When you hear the second action, you guys run up and get up on the toilet tank. And the crew laughed. They thought that was rather cute. So Debbie Coe, the cockroach handler, she took the cockroaches behind the set and they rolled the camera and I yelled camera action. And the camera's dollying in on Bill and it starts to come up and over his head and I yelled action. And just as we're coming up over his head to the tank, these cockroaches ran right up on the tank and were going like this. And the whole crew just fell out. It was an absolutely perfect shot. So I got this reputation where I guess I'm very, very good with cockroaches and other vermin because I got a lot of other vermin from that show on. If it comes to insects or snakes or some sort of a pig or something, they always give it to me.
But Kim directed cockroaches the same way he directed actors. You go here, then you go here. Let's kick it in the ass. It's the same way, that's what he said to the cockroaches. And I think it worked better with cockroaches than it does with actors, unfortunately. There's a scene where there's a riot in a mini store. What had happened is the shot is Jillian's walking into the store, and behind her, these 2 cars, they're supposed to pull out, and I think they were just supposed to be close. And the one car, I don't know what happened, the car skidded or something, and they crashed into each other. And if you watch the shot, Jillian turns around. It takes kind of a long time because, like, she's going, is anybody dead? And once she sees everyone's all right, she turns around and continues on with the shot because she's a pro.
Excuse me, do you sell road maps?
Kim called me up and he's all excited and Kim's going, what you got here is you got a major stunt in the background and you got your lead actor in the foreground. This is incredible. And you're going, oh, okay, great, Kim. Directors get excited about stuff like that.
I remember calling Darren Morgan after seeing Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose on the air, and I'd seen it finished previous to that, but when I saw it on the air, it blew me away because it was so good, it was so funny, poignant, a great character piece, terrific performance by Mr. Boyle. It, for me, took the show to a new level.
You'll find a woman tomorrow morning by the fat little white Nazi stormtrooper at Glenview Lake.
Dealing with the censors was always amusing, because it was always so arbitrary what they would allow and disallow. And there's a scene in there when Clyde Bruckman's describing this dream that he has every night where we see the dream and it's him lying in a field and his body just dissolves. What would happen if a body was decaying. And I had written as a voiceover a very specific description of what would actually happen to a body if it was a corpse, if it was decaying outside. And the censor just wouldn't have any of it. And there was no offensive words or language or anything like that, but I couldn't use the word maggots. I had to use insects, which seems really silly, especially considering other stuff we've done on the show. And there's one part where I talked about the tissues liquefying and the innards rupturing or something, and I couldn't use that. And the line I ended up using was, he says,
the inevitable follows, putridity and liquescence.
I don't even know what that means. The character would never say that. It would never use the word liquescence. No one's ever used that word. But I agreed to put it in there as my own sort of joke. I laugh every time I hear it. What does that mean? No one's paying attention to the voiceover anyways. They're watching the effect of the guy dissolving, so it doesn't make any difference. But dealing with the censors, it was just what's wrong with maggots?
What we were doing is we were lying him down in the same spot in the set, like 4 different times. It was Peter perfectly healthy, Peter dead for a day or two, and Peter dead for a week. And the difference was some nasty makeup that got applied. So there was a real Peter lying there who was getting kind of purple. And then beyond that, we then had dummies that were put in at successive stages of putrefaction, followed by a completely computer-generated skeleton.
Teso dos Bichos, I believe it means mound, sort of burial mound of the animals. The story had to do with a jaguar spirit, and when I was working on the story, Chris had the idea that it would be scary if it were like domestic animals, if you could bring it home to people's houses, that your house cat was against you. And so the idea turned into hundreds of cats living underground, attacking people. To get those cats to attack, we have miles of footage of the director setting up a beautiful shot in this underground tunnel, and there's the cats in the shadows. Go! And they stand there, and they don't move. And the trainer's off screen calling to them, and nothing happens. So they tried water spray. They tried bringing a dog in to try to scare them. Ultimately, we ended up doing individual cats, and they shot them against blue screen and multiplied them digitally so that they would appear to be ganging up and then attacking. And then, what else went wrong? We found out in the midst of shooting that there's a scene in the script where a cat jumps on Gillian Anderson. Turns out she's allergic to cats, severely allergic to cats. And we didn't know that when we started this whole process. And so they built a puppet cat out of some kind of fur with little articulated arms, and it had a little mouth that went, and there's a lot of really hilarious footage of this thing because out of context it just looks ridiculous.
And there's a guy on a stick below and it's doing this, and Gillian's trying to act like it's killing her. The Duchovny is trying to pull it off her, and Duchovny's boxing with it. I just felt my life coming apart at that moment.
Come on, Scully.
Mulder and Scully run in, they slam the door, and they look out this grate. And they're supposed to see all these cats, vicious cats sitting there. Well, we put the cats outside the door, and they were all sitting there, very, very pretty, and they were going, meow, meow. And I'm watching the monitor, and I thought, this is it. I'll never work again.
Things are a lot more jalopy-like than they look like. I mean, they're literally, sticks and gaffer's tape and gum just out of frame on a lot of the stuff we do. But it only matters what the iris sees. George Lucas kept saying that R2-D2 eventually would just keep turning left, and so you watch the first Star Wars, shots of R2-D2 would clip just as going left. Like, well, that was exactly the way we did a lot of things.
When we shot Quagmire and it was time to bring in the sea monster, I walked down this trail and I went to where they were going to launch this thing in a boat. And the dragon, when it got wet, I guess they didn't think about when it gets wet, how's it going to react. But the dragon's head was like this. They couldn't hold the head up. And it looked like they were dragging a piece of spaghetti across the surface of this lake.
The spaceship that is seen out the windows from the inside over Mulder's shoulder is the lighting truss. There's no ship out there. It's the lighting truss, and it's really our stuff. When he runs out onto the top of the hill and he comes out the door and the spaceship goes over him, we took the truss, we turned all the lights down now, vertical, and flew it over David's head. And what they would do is they would build around that truss a CG spaceship.
One of the things that we went for was trying to get a lot of different layers to it. So as it moved, you could see the perspective shift. And the idea was to have like boxes within boxes and lights behind the boxes so that you can't quite see what's going on, but you get the sense that there's a lot of stuff going on, but you can't quite see it. Jose Chung was another one that Rob Bowman directed, and I directed like a bunch of second unit, including the famous red Cyclops monster. That was so much fun to do. It really was. We were trying to make it was an homage to Ray Harryhausen, so we tried to make it look like stop-motion animation. This costume had stilts built into it, like really high shoes to make him like look really tall. And it was hard for the guy, and it was also hard to like breathe in, and it was hot. But he was a trooper, and he was swinging at these two like fake aliens, and the fake aliens were like basically just extras who didn't really I mean, they hadn't had a lot of acting experience, and we were trying to get the two of them to relate to each other. And he was supposed to look kind of real but kind of cheesy. And one of the things we did to make him look like stop-motion animation is we shot the camera running very fast and then took out a whole bunch of frames, so he kind of moves in a jerky fashion.
Jack, what is that thing?
How the hell should I know?
When I began the show, the network executives were adamant about wrapping up the show at the end of each episode with the crook, in this case, the paranormal monster behind bars, and we would explain the whole thing for the audience. This is what they wanted, and I kept saying to them, you really do not want to try to explain the unexplained. It's much more interesting and powerful to leave it open, to leave it a question, to leave it mysterious and vague. We resisted it, and I think that's really one of the hallmarks of the show now, is that it doesn't pander.